Warbles on a lot to ForeverWolfFilms regarding learning disabilities and confessions of a broken intellect. G'day Amanda, how you going? I've got to say I found that little clip of yours fairly interesting and curious and touching, and I just can't resist responding, okay? And I admit I'm not entirely sober at the moment, so bear with me. As it happens, I too have something of a disability in the field of Math-Um-Scratchy-My-Haid-Matticks, but my disability lies only in the field of mathematics. I do have a reasonable grasp on arithmetic, and yeah, I guess I better tell you about that. When I was a little kid, my mother's mother explained to me that she'd been an ace at algebra and she was really good at it, and I said to her when I was 2 or 3, well, okay Gran, you know, like, teach me about algebra. And she said to me, no, I'm not going to teach you about algebra. You wait until you're big enough and old enough to go to school, and then when you get to school they'll teach you all about algebra. It's very interesting. And a year or two later, when I got to school, there was a fashionable thing at the time called Cuisenaire rods. And these Cuisenaire rods were bits of wood, and they were cut up into cubes and rectangles. Now the cubes were white and they were worth 1, and the smallest rectangle, I think it was blue, and it was worth 2, and then there was a green rectangle worth 3, and there was a red rectangle worth 5, and there was a yellow one worth 10, or maybe it was purple or something. But there were various sized pieces of coloured wood, and they taught people my age, when I was in kindergarten, that, you know, like, white plus blue equals green. And there was an entire cohort of children who learnt to count in colours, and that was pretty handicapping. And it was pretty infantile, and it wasn't anything like what my grandmother had told me that algebra was good for, and I guess I kind of switched off in kindergarten as far as maths were concerned. A couple of years later, I was an infant, and I was in the class of the headmistress of the infant school, and I was so disruptive in class that I used to be sat in the headmistress's office in order to do my work on my own where I wouldn't be disturbed. And when there was no other kids to distract my attention, I was able to do a little bit of arithmetic. But by the time I was, say, 10 or 11 years old, in order to keep up with the kids in the B class of maths, I was having to receive coaching, because I really wasn't interesting. It never lived up to my grandmother's expectations. And then I was sent to a boarding school where it was fashionable to stream children alphabetically. So rather than being in the A or the B class with a bunch of kids roughly as smart as I was, suddenly I was in the second half of the alphabet with whoever was randomly stuck there. And I kind of lost interest because it was boring. And also I was rebelling. You know, like Australia at that point was moving from imperial to metric, and I'd been drilled intensively in the imperial system of inches and feet and yards and rods and poles and perches and miles and fathoms and pounds and hundredweights and tons, and suddenly I was confronted with centimetres and millimetres and metres and kilograms and litres, and I gave a bit of a protest. I never ever learned to think in metric. I retained the ability to think in imperial, and I developed the ability to calculate fairly instantly from metric to imperial, so that I can think about it and then calculate it back and then speak about it. So I've got some arithmetic ability in there. But then the boarding school closed and I went back to the local state high school, and because I had no academic record, I was stuck in the C class with the kids who were one step above polishing garbage tin lids, and I was even more bored. And around about that time, Amanda, that was when I fractured my skull. Kind of a funny story. It was, first I chatted up a 12 or 13-year-old girl when I was working on the Dodgem cars at the local show. And then when I took her off for a walk in the darkness, I discovered she was not far enough into puberty to be wearing a bra. So I ditched her for a 16-year-old girl, for a big sister. And the 16-year-old was pretty dumb and pretty ugly, but it meant that I could throw away my virginity. And the following night, I was so bedazzled by the idea of all the women in the world who were possessed of a sexuality that I gave a free ride on the Dodgem car to a different woman. because she had a large cleavage and a low cut neckline. And I jumped on the back of the Dodgem car, and there I was, less than 24 hours after discarding my virginity, staring down the cleavage of a different woman who I'd given a free ride to. And she noticed that I was perving on her tits, and she drove the Dodgem car flat out full speed into the wall while I was looking at her tits, and I took the 2-inch steel pipe that, you know, runs from the back of the Dodgem car up to the electrified ceiling, and I took that in the head, so I fractured the skull, and I acquired some scar tissue in the periorbital gyrus of my left frontal lobe, and I never learnt a damn thing in maths ever again. Not once, not ever. I kept the arithmetic, but I've never learnt maths since I was 3 days before my 14th birthday. So it's not beyond the bounds of comprehension for somebody to be smart but incapable of mathematics. I just can't do anything after what they taught me in primary school. But that doesn't mean that I can't do shit with maths. I mean, my father's father was able to take 15 pieces of wood and plan and mark and cut and shape the 15 pieces of wood and then fit them and join them together to make a perfect wooden wagon wheel. And then he could calculate how much smaller than the outside diameter of his wooden wheel he had to make his steel tyre, weld the tyre up, set a fire around the tyre and heat the tyre till it's red hot, knowing that it's going to expand enough to fit over the top of the wooden wheel, and then quench the tyre with a couple of buckets of water so that it suddenly shrinks and compresses the wheel, so that he's got a steel tyre shrunk onto a wooden wheel, and he hasn't broken the wood and the tyre's not loose. Right? My father's father had some pretty special mathematical skills, or arithmetic skills perhaps, and he was pretty good at woodwork. Here is an 8-foot long piece of laminated carved woodwork that I designed with my primary school level Math-Um-Scratchy-My-Haid-Matticks, and this is basically a 5 horsepower wind engine in a 25 mile an hour wind, and it's balanced to a cigarette paper. Down here we have a wind turbine rotor that's designed to go inside a Thrustrum Venturi, and it's actually made from the offcuts of the one above it. And here we see the scale model of the Thrustrum Venturi wind turbine, which I built and tested on the strut of a ultralight glider tug. And the only problem with it is, if you built a big one, it would sound like an air raid siren, and I think the neighbours would complain, and I don't want to live underneath it. And here is the exact mirror opposite of a wind turbine rotor. This is an aeroplane propeller, which I've personally flown 5 hours behind, and I've been, I think, 3,500 feet above the family home, pulled up into the sky by this, and I designed and carved that with my primary school level grasp of arithmetic, because I don't understand Math-Um-Scratchy-My-Haid-Matticks. Life is kind of a series of roundabouts and swings, Amanda. You start off with your genetic predispositions, and that gets reinforced by whatever happens in the first 3 years, or it gets sort of damped down by whatever happens in the first 3 years, and then you get some choice on what you role model on, depending on what traumatic events may or may not happen to you. But the idea is to play to your strengths. And if you're no good at maths, well, okay, accept that you're no good at maths, you know. If you were walking across the road and a car ran over you and you had your leg cut off, you'd get on with life and accept the fact that you haven't got a leg. Well, okay, maybe you've got dyscalculalia, right, like conference report said. If you can't handle maths, you can't handle maths. You're really good at 3D visualisation and sculpture, so play to your strengths. Do what you're good at, get better at it and enjoy it. I seem to have about 2 minutes left, so let's go for a walk and I'll show you a sculpture made by a friend of mine. Okay, let's see if we can get to where he lives before I run out of film. And this may be helpful for you with establishing some juxtapositions, just to see what the environment of the mad scientist actually looks like. I'm walking more or less northeast at the moment. Aha. A kangaroo that might run away and might not. There she goes, and I've just got to stop here because there we have visual proof that the kangaroo is in fact using stones to dig in the dirt. See, kangaroos use stone tools. I don't think anybody else realised that. I'm fairly pleased for having discovered it. Now, here I'm doing a slow pan so you can see the little grotto in which my mate the bowerbird lives. Okay, here we come down and into the bowerbird's bower. And as we can see, Bobby the bowerbird has arranged all these little blue things, including a peg that he must have carried a mile from the nearest house, because I don't have anything remotely like that. And there's the bower for his girlfriend to sit in while she looks out at all his treasures and he displays and shows off his dance. And I'm not sure the bowerbird can do any maths at all.